So a couple weeks ago, I was making, okay, I don't know if other people are like this, but my brothers and we do this all the time. We like to make lists and we like to make rankings. It's like, okay, what's your top 10 of this? What's your top 20 of this? Who do you think are the top 10 basketball players right now? Or the top, well, the Lakers, hey, they have a good shot this year, I think. I mean, they're the seventh seed, but I think they have a good shot. But I love making lists. I love making rankings. There was actually a birthday I had one year where I texted my friends that I didn't want any gifts. I just wanted them to make a list of something. Give me your top favorite 100 songs. I don't know. I just like it. It's fun to think about that sort of thing. But I was thinking about what my favorite sport was, and or actually no, what I thought what my favorite sport was. Yeah, that's what it was. And I realized that my favorite sport is baseball, which was very strange for me because I don't really like watching baseball. I just like the way that I like a couple things. I like that it's very weird. Most sports, the team that's trying to score the points has the ball. Baseball's not like that. I like how old it is. I like there are a lot of really strange customs that they have. It's pretty fascinating to me. I like that the injuries aren't quite as dangerous as certain other sports. And I like that, it's kind of a low barrier to entry. To just kind of play baseball, you just need some wood and you need a ball. You ideally want some more things, but it's not the same thing as football where you need pads or something like that. Or basketball where you need a metal hoop. So those are just some of the things that I was like, oh, I like this about baseball. But I don't like watching baseball. That's kind of weird. So I was like, okay, this year I'm going to actually try to like baseball and to watch it. And praise God, I've been watching baseball for 2 weeks now, and I've been liking it. But this year in baseball, there's something very strange happened. They did some very significant rule changes. And before we get into the scriptures, I want to walk us through there were some pretty big rule changes. So if you watch basketball, you'll see there's always a clock that's going down. You have 24 seconds to score, unless you get a rebound, and you only have 12 minutes per quarter, and so there's a time limit for every single game. Football is the same way. But baseball, there's no time limit. Potentially, it could go 1 hour, or it could go 5. I think that a couple years ago, there was an 18-inning game that was 6 hours, and I turned it on right as the 10th inning was starting, so I watched pretty much the second game. But baseball could be very long, it could be very short. But where that becomes a problem is for people like me who kind of have low attention spans, and you turn on a baseball game and it's just 3 hours long, 4 hours long, it's too long. So they decided that what they're going to do is they're going to bring in a clock. So the pitcher can only have 20 seconds to throw, and if the batter's not in the box with 8 seconds left ready to hit, it's a strike. So it's a ball if the pitcher isn't ready, and it's a strike if the hitter isn't ready. And a lot of people were really upset about this. They're like, what are you doing? You can't change the rules. Baseball's so old. What are you doing? You're gonna ruin it. But the problem is that I learned this recently. 100 years ago, the average baseball game was about an hour and 45 minutes. And last year, it was 3 hours long. They didn't change any rules in those 100 years. But just for whatever reason, the game just began taking longer and longer, more preparation for the pitchers, more switching, etc. And the funny thing is, 100 years ago, when it was an hour 45, the commissioner was still complaining that it was so long. They're saying, oh, it's too long, we got to change the rules, but they never did, and they just did. So why do I bring all this up? It's because I personally have a weird relationship with rules. And I know that the title of the sermon is Life in Messiah, and we're going to get to that. It's going to be via Galatians, and Paul talks a lot about rules. And I know that I have a weird relationship with rules. There's part of me that's every time I hear a rule, I'm like, who came up with that rule? Are we sure that that's a good rule? Well, you got to prove that to me. Part of me it pushed back, and I know that a lot of us have that. It's a very American thing. Don't tread on me. Who put you in charge? Why do you get to make the rules? But there's also part of me that really likes rules, that feels really safe about them. When I used to play sports a lot more when I was younger with my siblings, I must have been so annoying to play with because I was just always like, we have to follow the rules very carefully. And we would, and honestly, all of my siblings are kind of like this, but we would debate for 20 minutes in the game about what the rule was being broken and who was right and who was wrong. And the real sport became debate and not basketball or football or whatever. And that is where I sometimes can be, is I can be a bit of a stickler. I can feel safe in rules, and I can be very demanding on myself about following rules and on even other people. So I think there's that duality that probably a lot of us experience, and maybe some of us are a bit more on the rule-defying side, and some of us are a bit more on the rule, needing to follow, and oh my goodness, I need to follow every single rule. There's a range of experiences, and yeah, I mean, If any of my brothers are watching, I'm sorry for being such a stickler. I feel like I might have ruined a couple games back then. But so this way of interacting with rules, just kind of as a preliminary, as the thesis for what I'm going to be describing, I believe that Paul in Galatians is saying, first and foremost, that the rules are not the game, that the law is not the way for righteousness. That is Yeshua who's the way for righteousness. And the way that we experience that righteousness is not by following every rule very specifically, but it is by receiving Yeshua's life and pursuing him and pursuing conformity in his image, pursuing becoming like him and becoming in him. So that's the idea. That's the way that we should relate to rules. I'm going to start by bringing us to, so a lot of this is going to be in Galatians particularly 3, 5, and 6. So if you could open your scriptures, and I'm going to read here, Galatians 3, 9 through 11. So then the faithful are blessed along with Abraham, the faithful one. For all who rely on the deeds of Torah are under a curse. For the scriptures say, cursed is everyone who does not keep doing everything written in the scroll of the Torah. It is clear that no one is set right before God by Torah, for the righteous shall live by faith. Now, this is, I only want to say this once, but I might say this a couple times because I can be repetitive sometimes. But I am not talking here, and I don't think that Paul is talking about here, the Jewish person's desire to follow the Torah and to honor God in that way. I don't think that he's talking about he's definitely not talking about the oral Torah. He's definitely not talking about the rabbinic Judaism, because rabbinic Judaism wasn't there at that point. So everything that I'm going to say about Torah, it's not about should we follow Jewish customs, should we follow Jewish laws. I'm not talking about that. That's a whole other conversation. What I'm trying to talk about is just how do we interact with the rules that seem to be right? The rules that maybe we pull them straight from the Bible. The scriptures say this right here, thou shalt not murder. That's a law. That's a very important law. But then there are other ones that maybe aren't explicitly in scripture, but we interpret them in. Or maybe there's something that just seems like wisdom in our society. I don't know, going to school or something like that. Get your education. That's sort of a rule of society. But I mean, I'd have to rack my mind, but I mean, there's no command to go to high school in the Bible. So those are some rules that we bring into it, and that is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the rules that we have on ourselves, not about the Jewish person or the non-Jewish person who wants to pursue God by following the Torah, following the Jewish customs. That's not what I'm talking about. So I only want to say that once. So if it sounds like I'm talking about that, I'm not. But what Paul is saying in Galatians 3, 9 through 11 is he's focusing on kind of the negative aspects of the law, on the negative aspects of breaking the rules. He describes how those who rely on the deeds of Torah are under a curse. And notice he says rely on. He doesn't say those who follow the rules of the Torah. That wouldn't make sense. It's those who rely on them. And that's because the Torah describes how there is a curse for those who break the Torah. Now, we do know that the Torah is very good. It is incredible. It is beautiful. Psalm 119 says, this is 44 through 47, so I may always keep your Torah forever and ever, and walk about in freedom. For I have sought your precepts. I will speak of your testimonies before kings and never be ashamed. I delight in your mitzvot, which I love. And that's because the Torah is not just a set of rules. The Torah, especially what we read in the scriptures, specifically the first 5 books as the Torah, but also all of God's revelation in the scriptures, they reveal God's heart. When we see like a commandment from God, that shows God's desire for righteousness. So the Torah, as the psalmist shows, it is something that we should love. We should walk. And actually, he says that when we walk about in the Torah, we walk about in freedom. David did not think of the Torah as something to be enslaved by. The Torah is something that it brings freedom. It's something to enjoy. It's something that we should love. But Paul is talking about something a little bit earlier than that, and he's kind of drawing directly from some of the commandments in Torah. Numbers 35:31 says, "You are not to accept ransom for the life of a murderer. He deserves to die, and he is to die." And Deuteronomy 19:21 says, "Your eye must not show pity, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot." Now, I think it's kind of funny that the psalmist, like David, we know that David did commit murder, and David was not executed. So when David says, I love the law, he's not saying, I love the fact that penalties must be visited on those who violate the law, because otherwise he would be dead. So he understands that the law is beautiful because it reveals God's heart, but it's not necessarily something that is fun. Like right here, if you do certain things, like there's death. And I know for a fact that sometimes like you can make a mistake without even thinking about it, and it can have really bad repercussions. I let a friend of mine drive my car. She got into an accident. I should have known that I knew she wasn't a very good driver, but I just was like, I'm sure it'll be fine this one time. And that's life. Just one little, not being 100% wise, and now repercussions. So the law can be very, very strict. Like making mistakes leads to bad things. On the other hand, the Torah describes how the law is beautiful. And is important for us to have life. Deuteronomy 6:2 says, "So that you may fear Adonai your God, to keep all his statutes and mitzvot that I am commanding you and your son and your son's son all the days of your life," that's one life, "and so that you may prolong your days," that's a second life. So here we see that obeying the Torah is meant, it has to do with life in 2 ways. One, it prolongs our days. So we're supposed to, what the promise of the Torah, or maybe the goal of the Torah, that's more what it is. The goal of the Torah is that our life is prolonged. And also, it's a qualitative thing. So it's a quantitative thing, our life is prolonged by Torah, and also it is a qualitative thing. All the days of your life, you should be thinking about it. So the way that our life becomes beautiful is by experiencing God's law, experiencing God through that law. So it's something that makes our life rich and abundant, one might say, and something that makes it long as we are righteous or something. I can say that. As you are righteous, your days are prolonged. So those are the two kind of promises that God makes, and the Torah is something that is supposed to help us with that. However, I do want to take a quick aside. On Thursday, I went to a event that is a meal of Mashiach, and it was very cool. It was an Orthodox gathering. Everyone was very, very nice. And what you do on the meal of Mashiach, it's not as formal as a Passover Seder is, but it is similar in that it is a time of rejoicing. And you're supposed to, you rejoice in the hope that Messiah is going to come. And these people, they do not believe in Yeshua, so they don't believe that Messiah has come. It's not a second coming that they're interested in, it's a first coming. But the cool thing is that as they celebrate, as they drink grape juice or wine or whatever, they call them l'chaims. So we're going to take our first l'chaim to honor the Mashiach. So They understand that like life and joy are intricately connected, and Messiah and life and joy are intricately connected. And I hope that we can learn that little something from them. But on the flip side of this promise of life through Mashiach, there is Deuteronomy 27:26 that says, "Cursed is the one who does not uphold the words of the Torah by doing them." And then all the people are to say Amen. And by them saying Amen, they're saying, we accept this. Yes, all who do not follow the words of the Torah are accursed. Now, this understanding of curse, I don't think it's the same thing as it's not the same thing as like a penalty. You do a sin, something bad happens. It's not this under a curse is not the same thing as a murderer must be stoned or something like that. Or you commit robbery, you have to return what you stole and then some. That's not the same understanding of curse. I think how we should be reading this idea of curse is in the tradition of Cain, where Cain had a mark and he was sent to go live in the east. He was not able to live around other people who were worshiping God. Cain was under a curse and he was sent to live elsewhere. And the people of the land, the Canaanites, they were also described as accursed. And they were also, God describes how the land itself wants to spit them out. So that's this idea of curse. It's not, oh, you do something wrong, something bad must happen. It's, oh, like the world itself wants to kind of spit you out. So that it's a much bigger deal. And he connects Moses connects the Canaanites with the Israelites. He says, if you do not follow these laws, you will also be spat out, and you will have to go into exile in Babylon. So this curse it's a much bigger deal than like kind of, how do I say this? Kind of like missing the mark, penalties for sins. It's not really quite like that. It's not like breaking the law, there is retribution. It's a bigger deal. It's you have become separated from the community. You become separated from God. And this is unfortunate. And this means that all of us, when we violate God's rules, when we have a heart and a mindset that is not how God wants it to be, and it's how we want it to be, we are separating ourselves from Him. And I know that some people might say, hey, it's possible to be righteous, just follow the laws, it's not that hard. And I think that, I don't want to say that it's impossible to, I think it is possible to follow the letters of the law. I think it probably is for some people. And I think it's definitely possible to be broadly a good person. We know people who are kinder than they are mean, that actually are service oriented. That's just who they are. And so I don't want to say if you're looking inward and you say, oh, I actually am a good person. Okay, that's fair. But I will just say, the scriptures have something to say about that. I do think that it is possible to generally do righteous things. But one problem is that we don't always know whether or not we're fully righteous. I have had a lot of experiences where I was like, oh, I was in the right there. And then 6 months later, I'll be thinking about it and I'll say, oh my goodness, no, I was actually totally in the wrong there. And that's because humans are not, we don't know everything. So you can go your entire life even and say, oh, I have done the right thing every single time, and then wake up one day and say, oh my goodness, my entire life was oriented around the wrong things. I was serving myself. Or I was serving, maybe I wasn't serving myself, maybe I was serving a community that was headed down the wrong path, and I didn't say anything because I was afraid. I don't really know, but it's very possible that we just don't understand. Proverbs 30:12 says, there is a kind who is pure in his own eyes, yet is not washed from his filthiness. And 1 John 1:10 says, if we say that we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us. And I don't think that 1 John is necessarily talking about, I don't think he's talking about the fact that believers can serve God and behave righteously. But I do think that he's calling us to humility. Is he saying, if it's much worse to go around saying, oh, I'm fully righteous, I'm perfect, I haven't sinned, and that's not true, than to be questioning yourself and saying, oh, I'm not going to look at myself highly compared to my brother or compared to my sister. I'm going to view them as higher. I'm not going to think of myself as more righteous than them, because different people have different strengths and weaknesses. That's another thing. Can you imagine if there's a greedy person and an angry person judging each other, oh, I'm better than you? That doesn't make any sense. But maybe that greedy person never experiences anger. Or maybe that angry person never experiences greed. But there are a lot of ways that we can falter. And that pride is the most dangerous thing. That's the sin of the devil. The devil sinned because he was proud. So it's much worse to aggrandize yourself and say, oh, I followed all the rules since my youth, and then to reject the humility that you need in order to come to Messiah. That humility, I think it's better to have humility and have a lot of vices than to have a lot of vices and no humility. So it's dangerous when we start thinking about the law as something that gives us righteousness, because it can lead to the greatest sin, which is pride. So where do we come to righteousness? Where do we come to this life? Because we do want that life that Deuteronomy was describing, that long life and that life that's constantly meditating on God's statutes and its mitzvot. So how do we do that? And like with almost everything in the congregation, as we think about the scriptures, the answer to almost every question, it's Yeshua. Yeshua is how we get life. Yeshua is our salvation. Yeshua is our righteousness. Galatians 2:19-21 says, "For through law I died to law, so that I might live for God." For the law I died to the law, so I might live for God. So his life comes from death. I have been crucified with Messiah, and it is no longer I who live, but Messiah who lives in me. And the life I now live in my body, I live by trusting in the Son of God, in Ben Elohim, who loved me and gave himself up for me. I do not nullify the grace of God. For if righteousness comes through Torah, then Messiah died for no reason. He says, I do not nullify the grace of God. For if righteousness comes through Torah, then Messiah died for no reason. So think about about how he's describing life right now. His life comes from his connection with Mashiach. His life doesn't come from his own meritorious actions, and it don't come from his own good things, his own ability to follow the rules very strictly. We know, when I play basketball with friends, I'm a worse person. I'm a worse basketball player when I'm constantly focusing on the rules as opposed to just playing the game. You want to leave those basketball games having enjoyed yourself and having done your best. And yeah, if somebody hurts somebody, you want to call a foul. But if somebody does something, you don't want to be that person who's a stickler for the rules and gets everybody annoyed. You want to play your hardest and enjoy yourself. And you become a worse person when you become that stickler, when you focus too much. And that's kind of what Paul is doing. Is on a base level, he's saying we're not talking about the rules, we're focusing on the Spirit. We're focusing on the people. We're focusing on the person, and that person is Yeshua. Galatians 6:17 says, "From now on, let no one make trouble for me." I love that. Same. No. From now on, let no one make trouble for me, for I bear on my body the scars of Yeshua. Now, Paul could have said, let no one make trouble for me because I've suffered for the gospel, but he didn't say that. He didn't even say I suffered for Yeshua, or I bear the scars of the gospel. He says, I bear on my body the scars of Yeshua. So what he's doing is he's connecting himself and his power to preach, his power to build up the congregation. He's connecting it to his relationship to Yeshua. He's saying, just like Yeshua has scars, I have scars. Everything that's important about me is because of my connection with Yeshua. So that's what he's saying here. He's saying, I have the same scars as Yeshua. Galatians 4:4-8 builds on this idea and says, but when the fullness of time came, God sent out his Son, born of a woman and born under law, to free those under law, so that we might receive adoption as sons. Now because you are sons, God sent the Ruach of his Son into our heart, who cries out, Abba, Father. So you are no longer a slave, but a son. And if a son, also an heir through God. But at that time when you did not know God, you served those who were by nature not God at all. What's really important here is that in the same way that Paul says, I bear the scars of Yeshua, and that's why you need to listen to me. He's right here saying that the reason that we receive anything from God is not because of who we are before, because beforehand we were serving things that were not God's. And oftentimes, especially today, that's ourselves. We maybe don't have, maybe some people do, but we maybe don't have an idol in our living room. We maybe aren't worshiping Zeus. Although I do know someone who worshiped Odin, unfortunately. Yeah. But we oftentimes worship ourselves. And what Paul is saying is, I forget the verse, wait. Yes, what Paul is saying is that it's because we receive adoption as sons. But why do we receive adoption as sons? Now, he's not just talking about adoption, period. He's not like whatever your gender is, you can say, I'm a daughter of God. Yes, that's very true. But the reason that he describes son here is because everything that we receive is because in the same way that Yeshua is the son, we are the son. We are sons in Yeshua. That's what the promise of life in Messiah is. It's that we are bound to him. We are in him. So our sonship comes from his sonship. Everything that we have, all of his righteousness comes to us because we are also sons. We are sons in Messiah. And that's like, women can say, I'm a son of God too, because we are one with Messiah. And he said, now we can say, Abba, Father. And why do we say that? Because God sent the Ruach of his Son into our hearts. The way that this kind of is working is God has a son. We are over here, not adopted. The Holy Spirit connects us to the Son. The Ruach of God's Son, the Spirit of God's Son, is in us, in our hearts, so that we have the right to say, Abba, Father, so that we are in Messiah. The Spirit ties us to Messiah. Where do I go from here? Okay. So now that we know that this sonship is the way that we have access to God's life and to Yeshua's righteousness, and the way that this works is because I live in Messiah and Messiah lives in me. It says, it's actually really cool. He says, I've been crucified with Messiah. It is no longer I who live, but Messiah who lives in me. So Messiah is in us, but also we are in him. It's very beautiful that way. And also, the way that we have life is from death. So what's going on here is that we die to the ways of the world, and then we receive life through Messiah. So let's discuss. Now we have an understanding of that's how it works. Okay, I understand. I don't have life from my own actions. I have life from Messiah. But practically, what does that mean? Like, okay, that's really cool. And honestly, that's the most important thing. If you walk away from here saying, I have life because Messiah and I are one, and maybe I don't always experience it, it's true. I think that's a better thing than if you're going to remember that, that's more important than remembering the next thing, even though the next thing is very, very important. It's important to abandon the pride of our own actions, and even the pride of being a believer who does not quite sin as much as maybe you did 20 years ago or 10 years ago. I think that sometimes believers can get into a lot of trouble because we want to be 100% like Messiah right now, which is beautiful, but it can lead to pride. It can lead to the same kind of pride where we say, oh, I'm there yet. I'm perfect now. When actually we're still hurting people, and we still have a lot of the scars of our old life. Like if you think about, Paul says, I bear on my body the scars of Yeshua. Well, we bear on our body the scars of the old person too sometimes. And we cannot become proud of that. And even if we were, it wouldn't make any sense. Even if we were perfect, it would make no sense. Because, like we just said, all of our life, all of our true righteousness comes from Messiah. But let's get to the practicalities. How do we get this life? How do we get this righteousness? And the answer is that it comes from walking with Messiah and pursuing him, conforming our mind to his mindset. So an example of this idea of our righteousness not coming from following the rules, but coming from a renewed Messiah-centered heart is tithing. I was listening to a really good podcast recently from the Bible Project that was very cool. It was about these two Christians, these two believers who were both they were lifelong tithers. They were people who their entire life, 10%. And they were making a lot of money, so they were donating a lot of money. But the problem is, and what they began to realize, is that that's not what God's command is, for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you look at the Old Covenant, and I don't want this to be like a sermon on tithing or something, but if you look at the Old Covenant, for landowners, they were supposed to give a lot more than 10%. And for people who had nothing, there wasn't a command. They were to actually receive in a lot of ways from these, like the people who had wealth and who had land. So it's a lot more complicated than just, okay, you do 10% and that's it. Now, I will say this. I have heard some people say, okay, knowing that, you should just give when you want to give. And I think that that's pretty silly. Imagine if we did that with all, good deeds. Imagine if somebody said, oh, you shouldn't tell the truth if you don't feel like it, because God wants you to have a heart of truth. That doesn't make any sense. Or, oh, you should only not do this horrible thing if you feel like it, because God wants your heart to be redeemed. Yes, it's true that God wants your heart to be redeemed, but you don't just have free range to do bad things because your heart hasn't been fully transformed yet. No, it's you want to have your heart conformed to the heart of Messiah. And remember what I was talking about earlier, how our heart has been crucified with Messiah. So that means, if you think about money for a second, when you can't take it with you. Once you passed on, you have nothing. And in some ways, that's how we're supposed to live right now. We're supposed to live like dead people. We should not have the same concerns that the people who have no understanding of the world to come think, who have no understanding that through Messiah, we are already dead, and because of that, we are more alive than ever. And we see that Messiah kind of lived like that as he was on earth. So even before he was crucified, we get to access that because through the Spirit, we are crucified with him and we rise through him. But Messiah, he had nowhere to lay his head. He lived like a ghost. He moved from place to place, blessing people, and he had no ties to the world except for his love for people. And that's how Yeshua interacts with the way that we should be generous, is that we should interact with our finances as if we were already dead. And we should interact with our passions towards evil. That's the way that Paul is describing it. With our flesh, with our pride, as if we were already dead. Can a dead person have pride? No, that doesn't make any sense. No, we should crucify that. We should pursue the mind of Messiah. How he lived on earth, that's how we want to be. And the rules that we have in the scriptures and in the Torah, they can guide us to God's heart, and we should use them to guide us to God's heart. But ultimately, we want to be like Messiah, because everything we have is from Messiah. Everything that we receive, all of our righteousness, all of our life is from being in him. It's not from whether or not we're good at following rules. Paul says, those wanting to look good outwardly are trying to force you to be circumcised, only so that they will not be persecuted for the cross of Messiah. For not even the circumcised keep Torah themselves, yet they want to have you circumcised so that they may boast about your flesh. But may I never boast except in the cross of our Lord Yeshua the Messiah. Through him the world has been crucified to me, and I to the world. For neither circumcision nor uncircumcision means anything, but only a new creation. Now, as many as live by this rule, shalom and mercy on them and on the Israel of God. Now, I will say this again. I am not talking, and I don't think that Paul is talking here about the way that we should follow Jewish traditions and Jewish laws. We know that Paul had Timothy circumcised as an adult. Yikes. But it was because there is something that is important for Paul in following Jewish traditions. We know that when Paul went to Jerusalem, he was very careful to follow Jewish law in order to pay respect to everybody, and it's important to him. So he's not saying, oh, it's wrong to be circumcised, or that it means nothing to God if that's the choice that you want to make as a Jewish person or whatever. So I'm going to punt on that conversation. We're not talking about the way that believers should interact with Jewish law. What we are talking about is the way that we interact with our flesh. these people were boasting in their flesh by the way that they were following the law, or really by the way that other people were following the law, because Paul's saying, you know what, they weren't really keeping the law anyways. They just want you to keep the law so they can feel good about themselves. But even if they were following the law perfectly, it would be leading them to boast. So the fundamental mistake here is that they are fleeing the cross in order to appease the flesh, because there is a good feeling, there is a good fleshly feeling that we get when we think we're a good person. And we can think, it's nice to feel like you're a good person, but that's not what we're pursuing. And that can actually be one of the most dangerous things if we are doing wrong things, but we think that we are righteous. So flee from that. Flee the idea of circumcision and the idea of uncircumcision, because they mean nothing, only a new creation. Isaiah 43:18-19 says, "Do not remember former things, nor consider the things of the past. Here I am doing a new thing. Now it is springing up. Do you not know about it? I will surely make a way in the desert, rivers in the wasteland." Before we were dead, we were deserts. And Yeshua, he died and rose and raised us together with him. So we were always kind of dead. But now instead of being dead to true life, we are dead to false life. Instead of being alive to the ways of the world and the attractions that are there, we are alive with Messiah. And sometimes we don't always experience that. And Paul understands that. And that's why he says that in Galatians 5:16-18, he describes how there are ways that we can more so cling to Messiah and cling to his righteousness and cling to experiencing his desires. Because we always have his righteousness when we have abandoned our own. We always have his righteousness when we say, I am a sinner, I must receive Yeshua's, and we have that humility. But what we can do is we can cling to experiencing that. Galatians 5:16-18. "But I say, walk by the Ruach, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh." So let me say that again. "But I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desires of the flesh. For the flesh sets its desire against the Ruach, but the Ruach sets its desire against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you cannot do what you want. But if you are led by the Ruach, you are not under law." And notice what we just looked at. When you are under the law, you are under the flesh, because following the law can be a fleshly thing. So we want to abandon all that, and we want to walk by the Spirit. The more that we walk by the Spirit, the more that we are in Messiah, the more that we can use his desires. And I will just say this, the Ruach HaKodesh is always in us, but this does not mean that we don't sin. And it also, and this is very important for people who are desirous to follow the Spirit, just because it feels like the Holy Spirit's guiding you to do something does not mean that it's righteous. And you can feel very strongly in your heart like, oh, I'm being led to do this thing, and I think that it's righteous, but it really might not be. And I know people all the time who lie to themselves and say, oh, this is the Holy Spirit guiding me, when maybe it's my own spirit, or maybe a dark spirit. You can't always tell. And the way that we can kind of fix that is by seeking out Messiah's desires and then pursuing that. So being guided by the Spirit, but you can always check against yourself and say, are my passions for myself? Are my passions greedy? Are my passions angry? If you think the Holy Spirit's calling you to lash out, it's not. He's not. He's not calling you to lash out. He's not calling you to steal. So if you feel like you are, then you need to pray and say, Lord, make me come by your Spirit. Make me walk with your Spirit. I don't know what this Spirit is right now. So Galatians 5:24-26, now those who belong to Messiah have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. And what does he say right after? To guide us in that desire, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. That's a major way that we can find out if we are walking by the Spirit. If we are becoming conceited, if we feel like if we want to provoke somebody, if we are envying, then we are not in that moment walking by the Spirit. Amen. And that's not good, but Paul does say that it's something that we can pursue. Like if you wake up one day and you say, oh man, I haven't been walking by the Spirit this week, you can walk by the Spirit. Yeah, you can walk by the Spirit today. Sometimes I wake up and I say, oh, I haven't texted a friend of mine in 2 months. I can call them. You can just do that today. It's not great that you haven't talked to this person in 2 months, but you can talk to them right now. It's not great that you haven't been walking with the Spirit for the last year, for 10 years, for 6 months, for 20 years. It's not ideal, but you know what? You can do that today. And that is what God's calling you. That's what Paul's calling us to do. And this is how we have life. When instead of meditating on the rules of the game, we enjoy the spirit of the game. And this is the promise of Mashiach. This is the promise that Chabad and every Orthodox group that wants the Messiah, they understand that when Messiah comes, there will be life. And we understand that we already have it. John 10:10 says, I'm come that they may have life and have it abundantly. When Yeshua came, we have life and we have it abundantly. That is that qualitative life. That is all your days you shall meditate on the Torah. Well, all of our days we shall walk by the Spirit and receive Yeshua's life. And also John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. That's that lengthening of the days. If you are righteous, you will prolong your days. If we are in the Son and we receive his righteousness, we shall have eternal days. That's how we receive life. We receive from Yeshua and we receive his righteousness. We receive his sonship. And if we want to experience that today, which we need to be pursuing that. Not because that's what makes us righteous when we follow God carefully. Because again, if we think that, we're one step away, one step from being proud and from undoing everything. But when we do want to be like Messiah, we will be like Messiah in 1,000,000 years. So let's try to be like him now by clinging to the Spirit and by clinging to his heart. So in conclusion, as we think about our relationship to the rules of the world, maybe we are the type of person who has a lot of guilt because we fail, or a lot of pride because we don't fail. Maybe we're defiant about the way that the world's rules work. I know that I fall into those categories all the time. Just depends on my mood, I guess. But that's not the deepest foundation of the universe. The deepest foundation of the universe is that Messiah is our abundant life. Amen. So if you are that person, if you're like me, I ask that you pray alongside me. If you're the type of person who is fleeing rules, who's fleeing, is fleeing the righteousness that the world describes, there's a promise that righteousness comes from Messiah, comes from being like him. And if you're the type of person who is very proud of their righteousness, I also pray alongside me, because true righteousness is in Messiah. Dear Heavenly Father, I know that I am a person who's sinful, Lord, that I have wrong desires and I have wrong passions, and I get confused about what's right and what's wrong. Lord, yes, I know that sometimes I don't even know, so I can't even judge myself. Oh, am I righteous? Am I not righteous? Lord, I just don't know sometimes. But Lord, I know that you are righteous and you are life. And I pray that today I walk by your Spirit. I pray that tomorrow I walk by your Spirit. And I pray that I walk by your Spirit for all of my life and in the world to come. And I thank you that you are righteous. You are my righteousness. I pray this in Yeshua's name. Amen.